zdecyduj. Myślę, że tak, nie ma co przedłużać.
Nie ma co. Wszyscy czekamy na wystąpienia.
Tak.
Popatrz na... Nie, to nie jest świeże, ale to dostałem w zeszłym tygodniu.
To jest 15 już konferencja.
15 jubileusz. Nie wiem, jak to się stało, ale...
Dobrze się mówiła, będę zostać mniej więcej. Aż po 12.
Chyba tak się ma mniej więcej, nie?
Będą jakieś prezentacje? Nie. Czy będą jakieś prezentacje?
Nie, chyba nie, tylko jest stała.
Dzień dobry. Dobry dzień. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This conference is mostly an English-speaking conference, so I'll continue in English. Welcome to the 15th Annual Warsaw East European Conference. Since this is the 15th edition of something that seems to have worked, I think the director of the East European Studies Center, Jan Malicki, must be doing something right. This year we are even more intensive than we have been in the past, in the sense that we have limited the number of days that we impose on Vice Rector Duszczyk to 3 days instead of the usual 4 days. And we're going from dawn to dusk, so, or maybe it's from dusk to dawn, who knows. We have 20 various sessions, including an exhibit and an alumni conference or an alumni meeting of SIPA, and 80 people presenting from 16 different countries. And we were quite selective this time around, so I think that we're going to have an interesting few days here, and I would, before inviting Vice Rector Duszczyk to come to the podium, I would like to thank him not only for his intellectual input, because he was a really central point in the planning for this conference, but also because he has deep pockets. And he financially supported this meeting. So you can see he's quite happy that he was able to support us, and I'm hoping that he will do so again next year. So, Vice Rector Duszczyk.
Thank you very much for these very kind words. Mr. Minister Czaputowicz, you are in home. You are the part of the University of Warsaw. Welcome. I think so. It is not the first time, I think so, but welcome again as the Minister for Foreign Affairs. We are from the same faculty of Political Science and International Studies, and that's why it is really great honor for me to welcome you as the Minister at our absolutely beautiful room. But of course, I would like to also thank you very much, Director Malicki, who is the father of this event, of course, since 15 years. And thank you very much again for your engagement, for very deep engagement to organize this conference. Because this conference, I think so, it is one of the very important heart of our involvement in the international relations. And the East European Conference, why this is very important? Because on the one hand, we are going to speak about not only East European and our problems and our challenges and so on, but also we are looking forward to this, to discuss much more broader issues like for example, our relations with United States, our relations with Israel, our relations with other very important countries, but also this is also very important to think about the future of the European Union. Today, I think so we had a very important event about the migration, which is one of the very important challenge we are facing now, and I'm sure that we will face this challenge also in the next years. That's why I on behalf on my boss, my Professor Marcin Pałys, who is the rector of the University of Warsaw, I would like to very warmly welcome all of you in our absolutely fantastic building, this old library. February. And again, thank you very much, Director Malizzi, for organizing this, this event. It is, I think, so this small anniversary, because the 15 years anniversary is also, I think, so opportunity to little bit celebrate this 15 years anniversary, this conference. And I'm really looking forward for very fruitful discussion. And also, what is very important is some of the publications, recommendation after this conference, because it is quite useful. It is quite very useful for us, also as the authority of the University of Warsaw, to receive recommendation about the role of the university in international relations, but also how we can think about the future, our country, our region in Europe and in the world. Thank you very much, and fruitful discussion.
Thank you, dear Rector, for your words, kind for us as organizers of this conference, 15 Jubilee. But first of all, I wish to congratulate Professor John Mizgiel, visiting professor of Center for East European Studies, who since 2 years is the Warsaw East European Conference director. The title of this year's conference, Independence, is no coincidence. This year we celebrate the 100th anniversary of independence of Poland, of course. But Poland is not the only country who celebrates such an anniversary. It began in 1917 with the outburst of February Revolution, starting of February Revolution, which led to the fall of the Tsarist Empire and set free tendencies and aspirations to independence of so many nations imprisoned by the Tsar and Tsarist regime. Bolshevik Revolution, which led to the final dissolution of the Imperial Russia, made everything more rapid. There were a dozen nations trying to break free from the Tsarist Empire. Exactly speaking, there were 17 nations in the territories of former Tsarist Russia, trying to organize their states. But only few, like Poland and Finland, saved and secured their independence. Others, for a shorter or longer time, managed to free themselves from the Tsarist and later Bolshevik Empire and create their own states. Let me walk you through this process. It is necessary to start with the above-mentioned Poland and Finland. Then one should continue with the Baltic states, which were able to keep their independence for 20 years. One follows with the countries of the Transcaucasia, which had it for 3 years. I continue with various forms of statehood of Ukraine, no much longer than 2, perhaps 3 years, and Belarus for perhaps 1 year. We also have to mention such nations and regions as the Republic of Northern Caucasus, as the Crimean Tatars or Turkestan, which managed to survive for a dozen or sometimes even several days or several hours, like Turkestan. There were also such as Ingria, Kuban, Karelia, Idel-Ural, which in fact failed to build the basic fundaments of the state organism, state structure, state authorities, not to mention gaining international recognition, of course. We can't forget that the region which we can all so interested in the beginnings of the 20th century was not ruled only by the Tsarist Russia. End of World War I resulted in collapse of two other empires, Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires. That resulted in 1918 being the year of independence for states such Czechoslovakia, states of Slovenes, Croats and Serbs, etc. During I would like to say that this title of our conference is very important, and this year not only for Polish nation and not only for Poland. Poland is very, very important. But now is time for the proper speakers. Ambassador Winid, who is a graduate of our university, outstanding specialist who started right here, perhaps not exactly this place, but in this historical campus, and Minister Czaputowicz, University of Warsaw professor who came back here today. I supposed that it is the first official visit as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, perhaps not the first. Okay, John, please continue your fantastic work with conference, which makes the Center for East European Studies, Studium EUropy Wschodniej, very happy and really proud. Thank you.
So it's my pleasant duty to introduce to you this morning somebody who is closely affiliated with not just the university, but with the department that got this beautiful building just next door. Kind of surprising, actually, how things work here in Warsaw. Professor JACEK Czaputowicz is also the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Poland. I think here, while that's an important title and a very difficult job, his credentials are more on the academic side. And I would like to say one thing, that in the current international climate, that job must be very difficult. To try and foresee what's happening, not just on the European continent, but first and foremost on the North American continent, is an extremely difficult job, which one can only wonder how one survives in that kind of a climate. Maybe during your remarks, which I will invite you to deliver, you may add something about, did you ever think that you would have to deal with this kind of stuff? So please, Minister Czaputowicz.
Very nice to be back as a professor at the university. I used to work here also in this room, lecturing regularly until half a year ago. Now less time, but it is not the first visit for me to... Oh, thank you. And I would like to congratulate Professor Malicki for organizing the 15th edition of the Warsaw East European Conference. I participated in one of them or two of them in the previous years. Important event, and the most important thing is the continuation of such important scientific activity and maintaining the group of professors involved in the Eastern studies. Let me thank for this invitation to the 15th edition again of the Warsaw East European Conference. It is my great pleasure to take this opportunity to share with you remarks on the subject of the conference. The subject of the conference is independence, and I would like to add something from the point of view of the Polish foreign policy, so I will develop a bit on the role of independence in the Polish foreign policy. This year, we celebrate the centenary of regaining independence by Poland, as well as the independence of some other, most, in fact, countries from the Central and Eastern Europe. Thus, the notion of independence has become the motto of our foreign policy and guides us in our relations with other countries, especially those from our region. When considering the concept of independence, one should ask two questions. Independence from what and for what? We know that political independence constitutes a condition sine qua non for existence of a sovereign state, but it does not exhaust its nature. Independence is, I think, of gradual character, a derivative of the accumulated power. It means to be free from subordination to others. The political term independence has its legal equivalent in the term of sovereignty, meant as freedom from the authority of any other subject of international law. Sovereignty means also to be able to legal acts which may induce internal or external consequences, such as creation and exhaustion of the law, the ability to conclude a treaty, and the right of legation, jus legationis. As sovereignty pertains to the formal and legal status, the independence relates more to the state of mind and to national spirit. This is the ability to undertake independent decisions, or the autonomy to formulate political aims by a state. During the Cold War years, the states of the Central and Eastern Europe were not independent. Their autonomy was limited. Still, they remained formally sovereign because they formed separate administrative units, separate from the Soviet Union. Yet, the self-determination was lacking. They could neither freely choose the form of government nor enter into the international alliance freely. To be independent, a nation should be able to organize itself in a state. Statehood is the first condition. Then comes the effort, sometimes struggle, to keep its independence. This effort may never end because of forces, usually external, considering the independence of a state to be detrimental to their interest. These have been the fundamental elements of history and international relations throughout the centuries. Despite some predictions about the demise of the nation-state in the era of growing interdependence, progressing globalization, and deepening integration, such states, meaning nation-states, remained an essential form of political organizations of a nation, and the main actor on the international scene. The key objective of the Polish foreign policy is to preserve and strengthen Poland's independence and sovereignty, to ensure its security, prosperity, and high standing among other nations. But at the same time, Poland's freedom and security are better safeguarded when neighboring countries are prosperous and independent. Therefore, we have supported them in their efforts to build strong and resilient states. We have extended our hand especially to those who wish to follow their pro-European and democratic path. Ladies and gentlemen, as I already mentioned, until 1989, Poland was not independent. But immediately after the collapse of communism, Poles managed to restore their independence. We supported the nations that lived and suffered as part of the Soviet state and in the Soviet bloc. Poland was the first country in the world to recognize the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine. Soon after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991, we recognized the independence of all states that emerged from that empire. The so-called Giedroyć Doctrine, named after the editor of literary political journal based in Paris, Kultura, defined the independence of nations living to the east of Polish borders as essential for our security and national interest. Consequently, supporting our neighbors has been an established component of the Polish foreign policy throughout the years. One of the current examples of it is the Eastern Partnership, a flagship initiative of the European neighborhood policy. Next year, we will celebrate the 10th anniversary of its establishment. The main emphasis within the Eastern Partnership is now placed on the relations with Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. They are the countries which have demonstrated their will and effort to come closer to the European Union. The 5th summit of the Eastern Partnership, held in Brussels in November last year, resulted in a new action plan that is comprised of 20 key items to be realized by 2020. Poland was actively engaged in the organization of the summit. We promoted transport and energy connections, support for the youth, as well as combating Russian disintegration and disinformation campaigns. Poland argued in favor of including the confirmation of the membership perspective for the EAP countries in the summit declaration. We believe that our partners will join the Union as soon as they are prepared to do so. Together with other members, we are providing them with substantial assistance to modernize their public administration and judiciary systems and their economy. The independence of Belarus is of vital interest to Poland. We count on the new momentum triggered by common infrastructure projects, including on enhancing capabilities of border crossings in order to facilitate the movement of people. We have talked about the development of ports along the inland waterways passing through Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine, and linking the Baltic and the Black Seas. Since January the 1st, the areas near Grodno, Brześć, and Augustów Channel have been opened for visa-free tourist movements. At the same time, we care greatly about the living conditions of Poles in Belarus. We want to ensure that they can preserve their national identity and develop their culture. Similarly, ladies and gentlemen, Poland does not lose sight on the Western Balkan partners. These countries expressed their will to integrate with the European Union. We actively support their aspirations and share with them our experience regarding the way to the European Union membership, including through organizing thematic conferences. In recent months, I visited 3 Western Balkan countries, where I opened Skopje, Tirana, and Belgrade conferences, the formats of cooperation aimed at supporting these countries on the path of the European Union. Poland also participates in the so-called Berlin process, whose aim is to help Western Balkan countries to integrate with the Union. This year's summit of the Berlin process will take part in London soon, but next year we will be chairing the organization, and the next summit next year will be organized in Poland. There is an English proverb: when there is a will, there is a way. The reforms are necessary. We have lived through that experience too, and we can assure everyone that the efforts will pay off. There is an encouraging example of resolving the long dispute between Greece and the Republic of Northern Macedonia concerning the name of the country. Sealing the deal demanded courage from both leaders, Mr. Tsipras and Mr. Zaev. We are sure that the obvious benefits will be acknowledged by all concerns. For the Republic of the Northern Macedonia, this means opening the path to becoming a new NATO member and later on, hopefully soon, member of the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, the 3Cs initiative is being dynamically developed. Our intention is to make the region of Central and Eastern Europe, together with other countries of that region, more coherent internally, as well as more integrated with the rest of the European Union. By developing transport and energy infrastructure and ensuring better connectivity between the 3Cs countries, we can trigger processes that will make the whole region stronger and safer, especially when it comes to energy security, which is a challenge that has haunted the region for decades. The 3Cs initiative is a long-term project. We shouldn't exclude that in the future some nations that are currently outside the European Union will be able to join it. Ladies and gentlemen, bearing in mind these long-term goals, we keep an eye on problems, the ongoing violence in eastern Ukraine and the illegal annexation of Crimean Peninsula remain. We have been providing humanitarian aid to internally displaced people in Kharkov, Zaporozhye, Dnipropetrovsk, and the Donetsk regions, assisting them in integration with their host communities and giving them the opportunity to function independently. As a non-permanent member of the Security Council, we try not to let the whole world forget about the war in Ukraine. On May 29th, I had the privilege to chair the Security Council briefing on the situation in Ukraine, organized by the Polish presidency in the Security Council of the United Nations. Despite the Minsk agreement, the fighting in eastern Ukraine continues and heavy weapons are regularly used. The highest price for the conflict had been paid by civilians. The casualties amount to 2,800 dead and many thousands injured. Over 1.5 million people are internally displaced. Civilians should be protected according to the international humanitarian and human rights law. Humanitarian organizations must have access to the entire territory of Ukraine, including the zones remaining outside of the Ukrainian government control. In Crimea, we see systematic and grave human rights violations, targeting especially NGO activists and indigenous Crimean Tatars. Ladies and gentlemen, the 100th anniversary of regaining independence by Poland is also an opportunity to reflect on the long-lasting importance of American involvement in European affairs. On January 8, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson gave his famous Congress speech in which he outlined the United States program for peace. He believed the implementation of his 14 points would form the basis for a just, lasting peace. One of the conditions for peace, according to the 13th point, was that an independent Polish state should be erected. President Woodrow Wilson also named Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, the future of peoples of Austria-Hungary and those under Turkish rule. We hope that this belief in the independence and the importance of independence of Poland as a prerequisite for European and world peace is still anchored in American thinking and will guide Washington's policy in the future. Recent American decisions about the presence of US soldiers on our soil prove this, and we appreciate them. They are equally important for Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and other East European nations. We rely on American guarantees for security of our country also within NATO. As we openly declare, we need America for maintaining our independence. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. I hope I can ask you to send us your text so that we can publish it in this year's copy of the Warsaw East European Review, of which I'm deputy editor, lucky me. And I'm also going to ask Ambassador Winid to do the same thing. The ambassador's name didn't come up in Minister Czaputowicz's talk, but the reason that Poland is in the Security Council temporarily is because of the great job that he did last year when he got Poland into the Security Council, which certainly gives Poland a little bit more room for maneuver in making sure that the United Nations understands what's going on in this part of the world. And I think Mr. Czaputowicz was being modest in not highlighting the role that Poland plays inside the United Nations and making these kinds of things public. It's not that diplomats don't know them, but I think diplomats and governments need to hear more about what's going on here. So certainly the tragedy in eastern Ukraine is something that should take more time from the Security Council and doesn't. Our next speaker, by the way, is Dr. Bogusław Winid, an old friend of mine from the United States. We first met at the Polish Embassy in Washington a very long time ago. He went on to produce two very good publications on getting into NATO, which had all the bells and whistles and all of the academic things that are necessary to get tenure. But did Mr. Winid go into academia? No, he went into diplomacy and had a distinguished career and is continuing his distinguished career here in Warsaw after having served as ambassador to NATO, to the West European Union, about which everybody has long since forgotten, and today is serving as an advisor to the President of Poland, Andrzej Duda. Today, Ambassador Winid will be talking about the activities of the East European Group inside the United Nations, which I'm sure will be illuminating for all of us. Please.
Thank you, John, for this kind introduction. Mr. Minister, Mr. Rector, Professor Malicki, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for invitation, and thank you for allowing me to speak about the United Nations and Eastern Europe. This is probably for the first time in the history of this conference that we are discussing the United Nations. But I will try to argue that there is a lot we can do together, and our cooperation within the UN system can be fruitful and very good for all of us. So what I would like to do is to first start to discuss how we can cooperate in the General Assembly, Security Council, United Nations Secretariat. Where are the opportunities, where are the blocks, where are the problems? Well, but if we will go to the history, what was the role of the United Nations for Central European countries? First, as Mr. Minister was referring, during the communist time, we lacked sovereignty. So there was no national representation representing the real interests of the countries. There were socialist embassies, very close coordination with the Soviet Union, daily or weekly instructions coming from Moscow. So This was up until 1989. Well, then communist collapse, we regained our sovereignty, and unfortunately, UN was very much present in the Eastern Europe because of the war, because of the conflicts. There were peacekeepers, there were several missions in our part of the continent. Then I will argue that in the later part of 1990s and the beginning of the 21st century, the role of United Nations in our politics declined. This was because of the very powerful role played by European Union, NATO, OSCE in Vienna. This was more important platforms than the United Nations. But now I will argue that we are coming back to the more important role of the United Nations. And for our diplomacy, our foreign policy, this is a very useful platform which we can use to promote our interests. And the fact that Minister Czaputowicz spent most of the May actually in New York and not enjoying beautiful Big Apple, but actually working very long hours and leading the debates, it's a very good proof how important it was for our foreign policy. Well, Eastern Europe in the United Nations. From the perspective of Professor Malicki, I will argue that this is Eastern Europe is the most important part of the universe. Ladies and gentlemen, from the point of view of the United Nations, from the point of view of the United Nations, it looks a little bit different. We are the smallest regional group in the United Nations. So right now we have 23 countries. My theory is that this is not actually 23, but 22, because Russia is a member of P5. And when you are a P5, you are a bit different animal. If I can quote George Orwell, Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So P5 are a little bit different animals. So there are 22 of us. But when we compare it to, in the General Assembly, when we compare us to Africa, 54 countries. If we compare us to Asia Pacific, 54 countries, you see that our voting power is much more limited. It's basically half. Latin America, known as GRULAC in the United Nations, 33 countries. Western Europe and others, 28. This is nice story, but because Western Europe and others includes Canada, which is not exactly Europe, plus Australia and New Zealand, plus Israel. But this is, you know, from the point of view of UN, this is Western Europe. Now, when we are discussing EU cooperation in the UN, what complicates things is that European Union countries belong to 3 different regional groups. Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and Cyprus is in Asia Pacific. So coordination is even more difficult. But now if I can go to the Security Council. Security Council is the most important organ of the United Nations, was, is, and will be. How our part of the world was represented in the Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a problem from the very beginning, from 1945, when the founding fathers agreed to create Security Council. Originally it consists of 11 countries, 5 permanent and 6 elected. And the key question was, how we understand elected. What does it mean? Who can be elected? Well, in 1946, just a year after establishing of the United Nations, there was so-called gentleman's agreement. But it turns out very quickly that Americans and the Russians do have different understanding of word gentleman's and agreement. But according to this first agreement, the 6 elected members were 2 from Latin America, 1 from Middle East, 1 from Eastern Europe, 1 from Western Europe, and 1 from British Commonwealth. Okay, this was fair to some extent, because then Eastern European group consists of 13 countries. Originally, there are 13 countries, including 3 votes for Soviet Union. Please remember that Ukraine and Belarus were theoretically, at least, independent countries in the UN. This was a bit different architecture. The total membership of the United Nations in 1945-46 was 51 countries. 51 countries. Now, the history was progressing. The new countries regained their independence, and very soon the situation was a bit strange that, for example, Philippines could never run for the Security Council because they were neither Eastern or Western Europe, they were not British Commonwealth, and they were not Latin America. So in the election process in the UN, the countries which were not included in the so-called gentleman's agreement start to run where? In Eastern Europe. You will agree with me that Philippines is not Eastern Europe. I mean, we have probably very nice people, but they're not Eastern Europeans. So it was visible that we have to change the system. And the first attempt to change the system and trying to increase the role of Eastern Europe was actually in 1955. Poland was then running for the Security Council against Philippines. We withdrew after 4 rounds, and then Yugoslavia took our place. And after 36 rounds, there was no winner, so they decided to split the term. But this was beginning of the process to reach a new agreement to reform the Security Council. And the reform actually took place in 1963. There was General Assembly Resolution 1991A, which increased the numbers of non-permanent members of the Security Council to 10 countries. 3 coming from Africa, 2 from Asia, still one from Eastern Europe, 2 from Western Europe, and 2 from Latin America, from GRULAC. But at the same time, the membership of the UN was growing. When the reform was introduced, there were 117 countries. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have 193. So you can see how difficult it is to get to the Security Council. The numbers are speaking for themselves. It is extremely, extremely difficult, and the competition to get to the Security Council is even more important than years ago. So this is why we have right now a movement to reform again, to introduce kind of a new layer of reform of the Security Council. And this is one point when we as Eastern Europeans, Central Eastern Europeans, should cooperate. We should try to increase also the numbers of the non-permanent members of the Security Council coming from Central and Eastern Europe. And this is one of the most important goals for our diplomacy, to protect and to increase in the future reform of the role of the Central Europeans in the Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now go to the International Secretariat and especially Secretary General. We never ever, as Eastern Europeans, we never ever had a position of Secretary General. And theoretically, at least, this position should be moved from one region to another, one region to another. There were great secretaries generals coming from Africa, Asia, Latin America, 0, Western Europe, 0 from Eastern Europe. So there was a big hope that 2 years ago, in 2016, this was kind of a general belief that the candidate will come from Eastern Europe and that there will be a female candidate because there were no female Secretary General of the United Nations. Well, this was a very wise idea. We supported it overwhelmingly, but we produced 8 candidates. 8 candidates. So what happened? There was lack of unity in Eastern European group. Moreover, we start kind of a small or large negative campaign against each other. So we immediately ruined our chances. And as a result, well, Antonio Guterres was elected. And dear colleagues, we can argue that Antonio Guterres is a great Secretary General, but he's neither Eastern European, neither woman. So this proves nobody's perfect. He's a very good Secretary General, but with all due respect, we should protect the rights of our region. And the more they cooperate, the more chances we have to protect our own interests. Well, but this is not the end. The picture is quite dark, actually. Antonio Guterres, when he was assuming his position, he did not invite anyone from our group to his transition team, or he did not invite anyone to his private office, so-called 38th floor secretariat. There is 0 from our region. Well, his deputy, Amina Mohammed, very important lady from Nigeria, dealing with environmental issues, sustainable development. Is there anyone from Eastern Europe in her group? 0. Another layer, under secretaries, 0. We have some assistant secretaries, which is the 4th layer. And there are some representatives from Russia. But again, they were elected not as Eastern Europeans, they were elected as P5. The same way as Chinese, Americans, British, or French. They have some P5, I use this George Orwell quotation, they have some rights, and the rights are to have some representatives. So there's a lot of area where we should work better. If we will not support our candidates, we will never be elected. If we produce too many candidates, if we start negative campaign, the results are visible as we had 2 years ago with Antonio Gutierrez. We have some positions, and these positions can be used as kind of a vehicle to achieve more successes. Right now, every 5 years, someone from Eastern Europe is president of the General Assembly, known as PGA. Right now, this job is very well done by the Slovak foreign minister, Mr. Miroslav Lajčák. He is doing very well, but the next president of the General Assembly coming from Eastern Europe will be actually 5 years from now. And Poland actually will have this position in 2064. We still have some chances. But this is, again, a very important argument why we should cooperate better and why competition is good, but to some extent. And my argument was that we should concentrate on the competition within the group. Select candidates and promote them in the whole system. This is the way how our colleagues from Africa are doing. This is the way how our colleagues from Latin America are doing. I mentioned the reform process of the United Nations. There are several layers of this reform, and Poland is very much involved in this, again, trying to prove that there should be positions for Eastern Europe in the reform of General Assembly with the election of the Security Council. Extremely important point is the veto power. Should we reform the veto power? Our argument is that, of course, we should reform veto power, because veto power can paralyze the whole system. And Ukraine, the situation in Ukraine is the best example. Nothing could be done because of the veto power. So there are some, this will be a long process. Some of colleagues are arguing that the reform will never happen because P5 will block. Well, my argument is yes and no. When we look at the election of the Secretary General Gutierrez 2 years ago, we can see that the process was much more open, much more transparent. There were several open meetings with the regional groups, with the whole General Assembly, opportunities to ask questions. So this was in a very good direction. And when there is a pressure, there is a political and moral pressure on P5, we can have some successes. This is the way to go forward within the group and within the whole General Assembly. My main argument is that the stronger the regional group is, the stronger we as individual countries are in the system. We can use the power of the group, even the smallest one, to promote better our interest when we do have support of our neighbors. Even in some cases or many cases, we have very different opinion on some issues. This is the other problem. But to promote better in the UN, we have to cooperate better. Now, Poland was trying to present these arguments, and President Duda made this very loud and clear on May 17 when he was leading the open debate in the Security Council on rule of law and international, the importance of implementing the international legal system. We believe, and please go back to, if you will have time, please go back to the UN website. President's speech is available there. that if we will properly apply international norms, standards, international treaties, we can solve the existing conflicts, and moreover, we can prevent conflicts to materialize. So this is the way, this is the mechanism when United Nations can be useful for our foreign policy to protect civilians, to protect the borders, to protect development, to protect peace, stability. This is the way to go forward. Will this process bring fruit automatically? Of course not. This is UN. It will take time. But this is the direction I believe that we should go, we should continue. And I hope that our membership in the Security Council, thanks also to support of your countries, Poland got 190 votes during the election, which is the European record. And we were 1 vote short of world record, which belongs to Guatemala, with 191. Well, nobody's perfect. But our membership in the Security Council, the leadership role of Minister Czaputowicz during his presidency in the Council is the best proof that we are taking this extremely serious, and we believe that this is extremely useful mechanism which can be used to promote peace, stability, development, which is our and your country's main aim in foreign policy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Are there any questions, comments, suggestions? Who wants to be Poland's ambassador to the UN? Students, this is your ideal opportunity. Please, Nick. Is there a...
Okay, Human Rights Council. This is a very controversial issue, to be very honest. Human Rights Council was created some years ago, actually, to move the all human rights agenda from New York to Geneva to create better platform to discuss human rights violation. Well, the problem is that how do we elect members of the Human Rights Council? And you know, I'm trying to be a bit ironic. You need some sense of humor when some dictatorships are elected to Human Rights Council. I will not use any names, but you can look at the list who is at this Human Rights Council, and according to our standards, they are not models of human rights. This was diplomatic phrase. Okay, so it is true that some of the decisions of the Human Rights Council, some of the resolution, were absolutely biased. This is right. Bias against Israel, bias against United States, other countries. This is not model democracy. And the key question is how we can change the system. Should we step outside, or should we stay inside and try to present our arguments? This is the dilemma. In the United States, there were different chapters of this, how different administration when answering this question. This is not the first time that the United States is withdrawing from Human Rights Council. Then they came back. The same with UNESCO. But my argument is that it is better to stay and fight, basically. But I can very well understand that some leaders can have different opinion, and that if someone is paying very high dues for this organization, and this organization is not the most efficient in the world and is a little bit biased towards the biggest payer, then you can have different argument. Again, this is for theoretical debate, probably very interesting for the political science students. Should we stay? Should we go? Now, in the UN, we don't have very kind of a short-range goals. The goal is a process. The goal is how UN can positively influence the international community, international relations, how we can stop atrocities, how we can help underdeveloped countries, how we can promote these ideas of democracy, rule of law, market economy, sustainable development. This is the goals.
Anybody else?
Please, come here, please. With our mic will be better. Nie mamy.
Okay, go ahead. I will hear you.
Nie, jego podać się nie da.
Basically, my question is about the role of the Security Council. You mentioned that it was growing, but actually in the last years it was highly criticized because the use of force and also like non-complying to the rules of international humanitarian law, like the breaches of Geneva Conventions. How you can describe this? Like, I didn't get what was your argument for Security Council to have the role that it has at the beginning of creation, like in 1945? So.
Well, thank you. This is a very interesting question. Well, nothing is ideal. There are P5 privileges, and we will not change it unless P5 will agree that they will give up their privileges. This is very simple. Right of veto power. This is the key question. So each and every member of the Security Council can stop everything in the Security Council using veto. And when we look at the, 3-4 years back, you see that not only one, but maybe 2 or 3 countries were using veto on different subjects. And this can be changed only when we will have kind of a general reform of the Security Council. Will this come soon? No. But what is important, and this is important point, more countries supporting the idea of reform, more countries presenting these views outside and inside the Security Council creates political and moral pressure. And this is the way to do it. Will this happen automatically? No. Will this happen soon? No. But as with the election of the Secretary General, slowly but steadily we can go forward. This is the argument.
I'm going to try to be very brief. We look at what's happening in the Middle East, and and in Africa as well, and we see all these immigration from Germany and Sweden, Italy, and other countries. We see that the Security Council it's there to stabilize regions, correct? And politically, my generation, we've seen that there's so many challenges that with the European Union becoming weaker, we're looking for we're looking forward the next 20, 30 years. So maybe my question can be, wouldn't it be better for Poland, for example, which is the very powerful country that is gonna in a certain way is gonna stabilize all these migration flows that, for example, Czech Republic and Slovakia, when they don't want to assume these problems. Wouldn't it be better to also work with some politicians in both sides of, like with Russians and Americans? Because don't you think maybe there can be another solution? Look for other institutions, or maybe
agree, United Nations is not the model institution. There's, as I was saying, it needs changes, development, but the role which United Nations is playing in Africa, for example, is quite crucial. There are 115,000 peacekeepers. 115,000 peacekeepers, United Nations peacekeepers all over the world, most of them in Africa. So without them, the situation would be much worse. And the fact that United Nations was able to stabilize situation in Mali, not perfect one, in Central Africa, in Burundi, this is proof that actually the system is working. It's not perfect, but can you imagine having collapse in 3, 4, 5 other countries in Central or Southern or Western Africa will even multiply the problems. So we have some problems, we are working on them, but without the UN it will be far, far worse. So, but again, I agree with you, we need to reform the system, and this is why Poland is so much promoting the reform.
For example, all those referendums like in Catalonia or in Crimea, should Eastern Europeans respect that, thank you very much. Should we respect that process where we have all these small populations, we can say, that vote in favor of some maybe political changes that affect, for example, the European Union? Because if we see it at the history of Crimea, I mean, there's many Russians that have been living there for many, many years, and
well, I will not put on the same level the referendum in Catalonia and Crimea. I mean, we have, as Poland, we have personal experience. What does it mean, the Russian referendum? They did one in 1939 when they invited us from the East. So this was not the real referendum. Also, there were some problems with referendum in Catalonia. If there's a referendum, there should be international observers. They should be done according to the system, the legal system of the countries involved. UN should be involved. I don't really believe that small indigenous group, even if they are legitimate, the referendum should be done according to normal rules and procedures, and especially not by Big Brother telling what someone should vote. So no, UN was not involved in this, and this is not part of the international legal system. If somewhere there will be referendum, they should be done according to international law, international legal system, and then UN can be involved, and not by individual countries imposing their will or imposing their, like in Crimea, on the locals. So this is a bit more complicated than it looks like.
Please, and please state your name.
My name is Irina Zadorozhna. I'm from Ukraine, but currently studying at the University of Warsaw. You've mentioned about that we have lots of difficulties in the process of making common position among countries of our region. Mm-hmm. And my question is why, according to your opinion, it is so in our region? Why can't we manage to do it? And while other countries and other regional groups are successful in promoting their interests, and what should be done to change the situation? Thank you.
There are limits how much we can coordinate our politics. There are national interests which are very different, and I'm not going to name any countries. This is public, so I cannot go into details. But you can very well imagine two very nice countries in our Eastern European group, and they have completely different position on something, and I'm not referring to P5. So there are limits how much we can cooperate, but my argument was that if we cooperate more within the group, the more power of persuasion we have as individual countries, because we can use on our behalf the power of the group. Well, why other regional groups are doing this better? Well, maybe this is tradition, maybe this is how they operate from the very beginning. But there's a progress in the group. There are fundamental differences, but My argument also was that fundamental differences in one area should not prohibit us from cooperation in other areas, especially when we can all benefit from this, like increasing the role of the group and increasing the numbers, for example, of seats for Eastern Europe in the future Security Council.
We have time for one last question.
You said that within this group are a lot of discussions about different aspects, but what exactly problems are now discussed, and what's the main contradictions within this group's member? Thank you.
How to answer this question diplomatically and not using the name of the individual countries. This is a challenge. No, but let me be a bit more open. You can imagine that the crisis, that Ukraine situation is the best example. One country invaded the other country. Yeah? Both are members of the Eastern European group. One country annexed Crimea. So there's visible differences. But there are some also, this is not the only problems. There are some territorial disputes between countries. In the Balkans, in the Caucasus, part of the territory of Georgia is occupied. Okay, there are limits how much we can discuss because some countries are more equal than others because they have veto. So we will never ever have a unified position as the group. But if we will achieve the support of the group, for example, during the vote in General Assembly, this is a completely different story. Because if you can't, if veto can be used in the Security Council, there is no veto in the General Assembly. So if there is a resolution concerning Abkhazia, for example, or Ossetia in General Assembly, then there is a way to support this resolution because of the almost unity of the group. So again, the picture is not universal. This is kind of a multi-layer situation. Our position was to cooperate as much as we can till the moment when we have fundamental disagreement. This is probably the most simple and diplomatic answer. I hope my minister will not criticize me after that.
So thank you, Ambassador Winid. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for the mental gymnastics. And thank you for being very open. We're out of time. I would like to thank all of our distinguished ambassadors who came for this opening meeting and everybody else who is staying around for the rest of our sessions throughout the day. Obviously, I declare our conference open, and I would like to thank everybody for coming this morning. So, thank you very much.